Welcome to Ethos Effect Podcast.
Welcome to the Ethos Effect Podcast.
Podcast.
After building and learning from failures,
We discovered our ethos and leveraged it
to scale, sell, and build again our seven-figure businesses.
whether you're starting out or leveling up.
This podcast is your source for innovation and lasting impact. Hello, it's another Ethos Effect episode. Today, we've got somebody really impressive, really inspiring, Dr. Jeff Gladden. He is the CEO and the Chief Medical Officer of Gladden Longevity out in Dallas, Texas. He's got a podcast, Gladden Longevity, and he just wrote a book, which I always mess up the title because I'm living the opposite of it. Do you want to give it a go?
No.
30 is the new 100. No, fuck C. I got to start that over because I said the F word.
Why?
All right, well, I wanted to scratch my F word because I am trying to work on being just a little bit more eloquent and short-winded. For those of you that listen, you're probably like, thank God. But nonetheless, Jeff's episode, or the book he wrote, 100 is the new 30.
There you go.
And my experience is I am 30 and I feel like I'm 100. I guess I need to go see him is the point of that.
Yeah. I just like the conversation that we had kind of about changing it because he didn't start out in longevity. He started out as a cardiologist, which is kind of, to me, thinking of it like the antithesis of somebody that's trying to be a longevity doctor. And he kind of alluded to that. He said heart disease is elective. Basically, it is up to the individual's lifestyle and the choices they made to get there. So going from the heart hospital and his 10 or 12 offices in cardiology to kind of changing in his career later in his career, which I love also his idea about things don't need to happen at a certain age. You don't need to retire at 60, take Medicare at 65. That doesn't mean your life begins or ends or changes.
No kidding. The thing I've taken away from this conversation is asking better questions and just the power of community and the type of people that you're hanging around. Like, are the type of people that you're surrounding yourself with, are they the ones that are bitching and moaning because they turned 40 and 50 and that kind of thing?
Mm-hmm.
Or are they the ones that are challenging the status quo and they're looking for ways to optimize their health and they truly believe? I have a friend actually the other day that said, I'm going to live till I'm 120. And she believed it. 100% believed it. So those are the kind of people you want to surround yourself, right? That believe in this. Something we did note, and I think he spoke to it well, let's not give away his answer, but there's an accessibility, a financial accessibility component to this type of healthcare.
Right.
It's usually not covered by insurance. And from experience, it is very expensive. So we kind of dig into like, well, what does everyone else do that doesn't, isn't able to afford it?
Yeah, it's definitely a step past preventative, right?
Yes.
Some preventative care will be covered by insurance. Absolutely none of what he's talking about will be. And that's a challenge for the industry, but I love the way he kind of sees that as a problem. And I think he's right.
He is right. So for those of you wondering what he's right about, let's get started. Welcome to this week's episode of the Ethos Effect Podcast. Your hosts, Donovan and Chelsea Rikes, here today with Dr. Jeffrey Gladden. Dr. Jeffrey Gladden is the Chief Medical Officer of Gladden Longevity, also the host of Gladden Longevity Podcast, and an author of 100 is the new 30. And I always mess that up because I'm 30-ish and I feel like I'm 100. So it's the exact opposite of your book.
Okay. I'm 27, so.
There you go. So we're really happy you're here today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, great to be here. Thank you.
So you have kind of an interesting background because in medicine, you started off as a cardiologist. You're in a little bit different of a practice now. Can you tell us about your start in medicine and when and why you made the transition to your new company and what inspired that?
Yeah, so, it's interesting. When I was in medical school, I went to medical school at Temple in Philadelphia. And I remember when I was doing my internal medicine training there that one of my classmates and I were talking about, wouldn't it be interesting if we could optimize health? And we started to think about, what if you could get a set of labs on people and actually really work to optimize their health? Because Temple University Medical School is located in North Philadelphia, which is an economically challenged area. And the predominance of everything we saw were what you'd categorize now as sort of train wreck kinds of things coming in. And so from a young medical age, I was thinking about optimization. And then I went down the pathway of becoming an interventional cardiologist, which, of course, you do internal medicine training, then cardiology, then interventional cardiology. And what I really loved about that was the opportunity to be using different technologies and trying to find new solutions to problems. So I started in that field when balloon angioplasty was pretty young. There were no stents at that point in time. There was no intracoronary ultrasound. There was no intracoronary fractional flow reserve or any of the tools that kind of came online while I was there. And so I loved adopting new technologies to get better results for people. And I ended up, co-founding a heart hospital with a colleague of mine, and I ended up building cath labs and getting involved with medical device companies and all kinds of initiatives, if you will. But one of the things that I loved was the constant change in what was happening, the ability to adapt and grow. And I'd learned that if I had higher levels of precision, I could always get a better result for the patient. So this became kind of a mantra. You learn as you're training, but then you really learn as you're doing, right? So and so everything was going great. Really loved what I did. I built my own heart group. I had 10 offices. We flew around Texas and Oklahoma in a little A36 Bonanza, to treat outlying areas. I had a real passion for bringing high quality care to people that didn't want to come to the big city, if you will. And so all that's going great. And then in my 50s, I started to get sick. And it was interesting because when I grew up, I was always athletic. I wasn't like the star athlete, but I was always very athletic. I played soccer, basketball. I played some soccer in college. My freshman year, before my chemistry labs sort of pushed me away from being able to make practices. But I always loved that athleticism. And I remember being in soccer camp my freshman year, being able to run basically forever, right? It's just like you could just run all day. So I went through my cardiology training. I started my practice. I'm busy. And in my 40s, I decided, you're putting on a little weight here. I think I should maybe start running again. So I went for a run and I could run 2 blocks. Right?
Wow.
So from miles and miles to 2 blocks, and I thought, oh my gosh. And it was a big wake-up call for me because I think this happens for entrepreneurs in general, is that we actually leverage our health for the sake of building our businesses, building our practices, building our families, building our communities, but we're taking our health and leveraging it, right? And so we can run ourselves into debt, so to speak, a health debt. And so in my 40s, I thought, well, okay, I'm going to turn this around. So I started looking for every way that I could to get physical activity. I would take the stairs. I would ride my bicycle to the hospital. I would ride my bike on the weekends. I started going for runs and things like that. A few months later, I could go run 3 miles and, fitness comes back fairly quickly. And that was great. And that worked well up until my 50s. So now I'm in my early 50s and all of a sudden that's not working anymore. And I'm exhausted all the time. I'm putting on weight again. When I would come under significant stress, I would feel myself go over this cliff of depression. It wasn't like you could go for a run or talk yourself out of it or watch a movie and have a good laugh and feel better. It was just like you were over a cliff. And my father, who died with dementia, was developing dementia at that point in time. And I started to feel brain fog coming on. And I'm like, holy cow, this is concerning. And so I went in and got tested. And what I was told was, hey, everything checks out for your age. You're just getting older. Why don't you take an antidepressant? Right? So here I am, 53, 54, and it's like, oh my gosh, I've hit the peak of my life, right? I've hit the zenith of my life. It's just going to be downhill from here. And it was such an existential moment for me that it was like, I can't do that. I'm not going to accept that. And that's when I really kind of threw myself into functional medicine, integrative medicine, age management medicine, went out and got certifications and things like that. And after 2.5 years of work, I basically had cracked the code as to everything that was going on for me, right? And we could crack that same code now, in a matter of hours if we had the test results in front of us. But it took me 2.5 years to figure it out then. And it boiled down to, when I was talking about having higher levels of precision and understanding to get a good outcome for somebody, that's what happened to me when I actually understood my genetics. and I understand that I don't make certain neurotransmitters efficiently, and that increases my risk for dementia and it increases my risk for depression. I don't have Alzheimer's genes, but I have other genes that can contribute to that. And then my exhaustion was the fact that all my thyroid blood tests looked normal. They were all in the normal range. And yet at a cellular level, when we did biometric testing, like a resting metabolic rate or reflex testing, I was very low in thyroid. And so once I got on the right thyroid, combination of T3 and T4, because genetically I don't convert inactive thyroid to active thyroid in my brain, right? I'm homozygous, which means I have the worst genetic configuration for doing that. So when I was able to compensate for my genetics in terms of both my neurotransmitters, my thyroid, and then I was low on testosterone at that point in time and DHEA, and I got hormones optimized again, all of a sudden it's like, wow, I lost 20 pounds of fat, put on 10 pounds of muscle, weighed about what I did in college, could do anything I wanted. My brain came back online. I wasn't exhausted, and I didn't have brain fog. And I thought, oh my gosh, I've been practicing sick care.
Right.
I'm done. I'm done with sick care. I have 10 offices and 12 doctors. I'm done with this. I can't do this anymore. I have to leave this. I'm being called into another field, and that is health optimization. And so that's how it started. Really, back in 2012, I left the cardiology world, and I've been on this quest now to really answer the big questions. And so that's kind of how it got started.
I feel like the two practices couldn't be much different, right? Because I feel like so much of, I mean, from an outsider's perspective, I'm not a doctor and I don't pretend to be one, but it would seem that most of the stuff you're probably treating in the heart hospitals and your cardiology practices, a lot of that's preventable, right? Like heart disease is largely lifestyle based.
It's elective. Heart disease is elective. Apart from a few incredibly strong genetic situations, it's an elective, you don't have to get heart disease.
Right. So on one side, you're going through that journey personally, you kind of figure it out, you're feeling better. And then, day to day, you're kind of dealing with the opposite side of the spectrum, people who either chose not to or were not aware of how to prevent their own disease.
Yeah, that's right. And I think, in life, one of the things that I learned is that life is really, and you can relate to this because you're doing this podcast, life is really about having the conversations that you want to have.
Yes.
That is honestly the exact reason we started this podcast, was just to have better conversations with the people who are thought leaders in their industry and up to something bigger. Right?
That's right.
And there's so much power in going against the status quo, but it's also can be a very lonely journey, which is why these better conversations are so important, right? And I read one of your, I don't know if this was in your book or if I just saw it on Instagram, but you had spoke about 5 pillars, I think, to longevity. And one of them had something to do with community. And was it something about good conversations? Am I remembering this correctly?
You're blending a couple things together.
Okay, well, help me out. Unblend,
they're all
please.
in there. Yeah, so good for you. That's good memory. So what actually happened was when I left cardiology, I started to ask different questions. All right, because as professionals, and I think this is true for entrepreneurs listening, you get trained in certain things or you learn certain things, and so you get married to a way of thinking about things, which ultimately comes down to asking a set of questions, right? And so you get married to a set of questions. And as physicians trained, we got married to a set of questions. Are you having chest pain? Are you short of breath? Are you having palpitations? Did you pass out? And you have answers for those questions. What I realized when I got myself better was that I needed to ask different questions, right? And so the first question I asked when I really felt great again was, geez, I wonder how good I can be. I wonder how fit, how strong, how mentally sharp, and for how many years and decades can I carry this forward? Because I felt great again. I went from feeling like I wasn't going to be able to keep up with my kids to my kids could not being able to keep up with me again, right? So it's like, I wonder how good I can be. And that led into other questions like, how do we make 100 the new 30? How do we actually function like a 30-year-old physically when we're 100? And then how do we live young for a lifetime, right? How do we live young for a lifetime? And we can go into that in a little more detail. And the fourth question that we wake up to every day here is, how do we live well beyond 120? Can we crack the code on getting beyond 120 and really live and thrive and do well, right? So when I left cardiology, I started to ask these different set of questions, and that led to still bringing all of my medical training with me. I never rejected anything, right? And so it's like, no, all of that was foundational. The way I can think about biochemistry and physiology and all that's been such a gift to bring forward. And yet, when you combine it with new questions, you start to get new answers. So in my world now at Gladden Longevity, we literally have thousands of answers that I never had before that work incredibly well, incredibly well. I just got off the phone with a client of ours that just had to have surgery done for a colon issue that developed well before we ever saw him. Advanced colon inflammation that was going to lead to cancer. And so rather than try to deal with cancer, it's like, and the colon wasn't functioning well, it was constricted and all these things. So they took it out. And we prepped him for the surgery in such a way with the right peptides, the right nutrition, all these different things that his nurse came in today. He's going to go home tomorrow. I just talked to him a couple of minutes ago. His nurse came in today and said, we've never seen anybody recover as well as you have.
Wow.
Right. And so this is what's possible. But in my traditional medical practice, that's not possible. But there's so much that's possible today that I just love stepping into this space of really optimizing stuff. So that's a piece of it. So, but back to your point, sorry. So blending those things together. So really in that context, I've developed 4 and now 5 circles that really need to be addressed if you're going to optimize longevity. And I've actually redefined longevity itself, right? So we could say, well, what's longevity mean, right? What does it mean? Well, to live a long time. Right. I want to be healthy for a long time. But I've actually, as I've thought into it and felt into it and realized how my life has progressed, really my definition for longevity is that when I'm 100, I want to have a 30-year-old body and a 300-year-old mind.
That's a good definition. I like that.
It's because that becomes the target. It's not about playing golf more. It's not about fishing more. It's about being with family and friends and people you love. That's all good. But really, if we have the gift of health, right, and the gift of being able to progress, well, let's keep our youthfulness so we can continue to learn new sports and do new things and all this kind of stuff. But let's develop psycho-spiritually and relationally into, the masters of sort of the Zen world, if you will, where we have all that equanimity, all that perspective, all that wisdom, right? So for me, that becomes really the target.
All right.
Out of that are these circles. One is life energy, which is a psycho-spiritual space, then longevity, which is actually going at the things that are actually driving the aging process. Then there's health, then there's performance. And then the 5th circle is now the environment. So under life energy and relationships, conversations fall in. And under the circle of environments, you have home, office. Everybody lives in 4 environments for the most part: home, office, work, travel, business, or vacation travel. And optimizing those becomes very important in the equation also. So anyway, that's how that fit together. Yeah.
So we're in the healthcare space as well, kind of on the other side. While you're on the physician side, the clinical side and healthcare delivery, we're on the payer side, working with employers and insurance and all kinds of stuff. What do you think could be done better in our current, in the current state of healthcare in this country to kind of better prevent conditions rather than just treat ones that have already occurred and actually get people to this state instead of just taking care of problems on a day-to-day basis?
Sure. Well, you have to look at the economics of it to really understand it, right? So the economics of it are all around people being sick, not necessarily getting better, right? A pharma makes money from selling drugs to you every week or every month, not by giving you something that cures you, so to speak. There's, you have basically chemical companies that are running the food industry. So now you have very nutrient depleted food, right? You have people that are kind of running on a treadmill. And I'm thinking about doctors, right? The doctors are basically on a treadmill tied to their electronic medical record, needing to see a patient every 10 minutes, right? In order to make their quota, to make their income, right? And the hospitals are there to make a profit, and they are incredibly profitable, incredibly profitable. Pharma is incredibly profitable, despite the high cost of putting drugs through the FDA. So there's and cancer is incredibly profitable, and so you have this whole economic engine that's basically pretty happy, right? Because
Yes.
everybody's making a lot of money. People happen to be dying; they don't happen to be thriving, but everybody's making money at the along the way. And so, in really, when you ask the question, what would have to change? I think the economic incentives would have to change fundamentally for it to really shift. You could talk about, well, we could institute this program or that program or try this and sure, try to coach people and do all these things and get them apps and all that stuff. But fundamentally, if the economics aren't shifted, then that's just people kind of being Don Quixote a little bit in the face of this, giant industrial complex.
Yeah.
So
Couldn't agree more. We see it on a day-to-day basis, and
yeah.
we will actually have a healthcare documentary coming out soon that
Oh,
Chelsea and I
cool.
worked on producing, and it's
Yeah.
called "It's Not Personal; It's Just Healthcare."
Yeah.
And it kind
Good
of
title. It's a good title.
it covers a lot of this, and kind of from a different aspect. And I certainly can see and appreciate like your side of it, as well as what you're seeing on on a healthcare delivery, and we're seeing it from how decisions are made for insurance and like why those and that's more the pharma side, the employer side, the insurance company side as well, that's
Hmm.
also kind of creating that.
But
Yeah.
that's exactly what we talk about with in our businesses aligning incentives, right? Like
Yes.
if
That's it.
everybody, if,
That's it.
to your point, hospitals are very profitable. The one part of the piece that you didn't mention, which is incredibly profitable, are insurance companies,
Oh
right?
yeah.
And
Yeah.
also even
That's right.
brokers. So
That's right.
we are we are an advisor. We don't call ourselves a broker, and the reason is because we work for a fee as opposed to taking commission. But
Hmm.
what's super interesting about the hospitals, the carriers, the vertical integration of hospitals gobbling up independent practices, carriers buying PBMs, which is wild to me. Um, all of that, there's in all of it, it's right. If you just follow the money and follow the incentives, there's no wonder
That's right.
that everything is unaffordable and it's low quality care most of
That's
the
right.
time.
That's right.
And an issue that I always have had with this sounds weird, but to say like with what you do, because I love what you do. But the thing that has been interesting to me is like I wasn't introduced to this world until I had enough money to afford it.
Hmm.
And that sucks, right? Because
Hmm.
there's a lot of people out there who need what you have and your knowledge and your team, but ultimately, most of the time, it's not going to be covered under insurance. And most of the time, it's going to be really freaking expensive. So, what do you say to that? And is there a way to make it more accessible?
Yeah. That's a great point. The way that I think about it is this. We are really all in and really serious about making 100 the new 30
Mm-hmm.
because we think that that really opens up a brand new uh, economy, a brand new way of living, right? So this 300-year-old mind, 30-year-old body, we're all in on that. And to be able to do that is really like going to Mars, right? So it's expensive to go to Mars. Nobody's ever gone to Mars before, right? And so if you're going to go to Mars, number one, it's evolving technology that gets you there. Number two, there's a big investment of time, attention, and resources on my part, on our part, and also
Mm-hmm.
our client's part, right? We're in it together
Yeah.
to make this happen. And there's no apology about that because going to Mars is admirable, right? I mean, it's an admirable goal. And I think being able to change the trajectory of aging for the entire planet, which is my passion in life, that's really my goal in life, is to change the trajectory for the entire planet, has to start by somebody going to Mars,
Yeah.
right? Right. And so you've got to show that you can go to Mars and then from there democratize it. Simultaneously with that, however, we've been very conscientious about democratizing the information that we have. For example, writing the book. The book is $25. Having a podcast, the podcast is free. There are supplements that people can buy for less than $100 that can be very, very effective. And so we go through some of these things. So we try to make the information accessible to people. But if you want to go all in and do, full genome sequencing and lots of high tech testing and things like that, where we're literally sending things around the world to get answers for people, it does take money at this point in time,
Of
right?
course. Yeah.
There's talk about, whether or not there could be an insurance program set up for health optimization, right? And so we've been in conversations with people around that. Nobody's quite figured out how to crack the code there. I'm working on it from two different angles right now that I won't go into, that I think could actually be viable. And so it's a real passion of mine to really, as I said, change this glide path of aging for everybody, because I saw what it did to my grandparents, right? My grandmother, as she was getting older, on my mom's mom and my mom's dad, I was very, very close to them. I was not as close to my dad's parents for whatever reason, but um, I had a very close relationship with them. And as my grandmother got older, she just kept telling me, Jeff, it's hell to get old. You don't ever want to get old, right? Then my mother died. My grandfather died at 97. She died at 96.
Wow.
My mother died at 93. And my mother picked up that same mantra, right? Jeff, it's hell to get old. You don't ever want to get old. And so here I am growing up, hearing this over and over and over again. And it's like, I think everybody suffers from this. Everybody's family suffers from this, right? Everybody's parents, everybody's relatives,
Yeah.
our peers, right? And so I really want to have a major impact for everybody's sake. So it's my heart's in the right place. If I had $1 trillion, we could do more for everybody, but we don't. And so, we're doing the best we can.
Well, it seems like there's this almost like comfort in like collective suffering that I think people succumb themselves to. And it's like, oh, like I just saw one of my girlfriends, she turned 30 a couple years ago, and she was just like, 30 hit me like a brick. And I was like, actually, me too, right? And I like felt solace in the fact that she also suffered hitting 30, which is funny because
Well, that's
obviously,
interesting.
yeah. And then you hear people say like, oh, just wait until you have kids. Your life is over. Your body's never going to be the same. Oh, just wait. Donovan's going to be 40 soon. No, now we're starting to hear like the bullshit around 40.
I am not.
You're not turning 40?
That is not true.
Okay. He actually never knows how old he is. Which
That's true.
Is probably, I don't think it's brain related.
I could
think
be 40
it's
now.
attitude.
I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I'm 27, as I mentioned
There you
earlier.
go.
So, yeah. So
300-year-old mind, though.
That's it.
I love that. And what we've been trying to do too is structure that for employers, and more so in, like a professional services firm. So think like your attorneys, your CPAs, your architects, like the professionals that really, their kind of careers are built on that health debt that you talked about, right?
That's
like they're sacrificing, they're lending from today to advance their future in their profession. And that's something we're hoping we can structure to kind of get some of the at least the basics
The
of
precision diagnostics.
of the testing and some of the things. What are the biggest things that you think affect most people or make the biggest change once you get into some of the diagnostics and different areas? Is it hormones or food related, both?
Or full body MRIs.
So let me take a step even prior to that.
Mm-hmm.
Let me just say a couple of things. One is that youth is over at about age 25 or 26.
I knew it.
Been shown, right? So when you say that you feel the aging process as you hit 30 or mid 30s or close to 40 or whatever, it's true. It's happening. And so the biggest problem that I see is that people have normalized it. Your girlfriend and you are talking about it as if this is normal, right? And then your parents say, oh yeah, it's normal. And your other people say, well, wait till you hit 40, right? And so we've normalized this whole aging process, right? We expect it to happen. And when it happens, we're not surprised. So we accept it. There's an acquiescence to it. And I think that is the biggest problem that we have. And it's reinforced by our companies. It's like your age, whatever, it's time to retire. Your government, you're at this age, it's time to collect a social security check or whatever it is. And so the entire culture is built around this idea that as you go through life chronologically, you're going to get old and you're going to not be able to do what you used to do, right? And the interesting thing, I think the most powerful thing that anybody can do is to say, we live in an age, really the first age ever, where that is not true. It's literally not true, right? So I just completed 70 laps around the sun back in February, right? But I can literally do anything I want. Run 4 miles. I'm going to ride my mountain bike again tomorrow. I'm snowboarding mountain bike. I do anything I want. Surf, anything I want to do. My brain is incredibly sharp. I have a whole series of biological ages, right, that range from 26 to somewhere in my 50s. And I think it's so important for people to understand that if you really wake up every day and claim a different age, you can have that age. So in my case, it's 27. And it's 27 now because I'll be 27 this decade, 28 the next decade, 29 the next decade. When I'm 100, I'll be 30, right? But the idea is that if you can step away from this idea that it's happening and we need to adapt to it into, I'm going to make it so it doesn't happen, right? It really is possible. Then you start to ask the question, okay, well, how do I do that? How do I wake up 27 every day? And if I wake up and I don't feel 27, what am I going to do about it? You see, it really changes all the questions that you're asking. And in life, you only get the answers to the questions you're asking. So if you're asking, well, how do I adapt to the fact that I'm now 30, that I'm now 40? How do I make do now that I've had my children or whatever it is? Those are the questions you get. But if you ask the question, no, how do I live young for a lifetime? How do I stay young and live young with a young mindset and a young body for a lifetime? Then you'll start to find those answers. And yes, of course, it does include eating well, sleeping well, exercising, the right kind of exercise. It includes, getting testing done, screening yourself for cancer, knowing where your hormone levels are, what your thyroid's doing, where are you in this process that's happening around you, but doesn't necessarily have to control you, right? And so it's really, I think, boils down to individuals and organizations at the level you're talking, starting to ask a different set of questions and actually project a different future than what they've normalized.
I love that. I think that's a subtle thing that you said, but it rings true in everything in life, asking different questions, asking better questions,
That's right.
instead of just what is the norm, like what is the status quo? Because when you look at things, you're like, did I set this status quo? Like, am I happy with it?
Right.
Then why am I going to continue to live in that world and
Exactly.
ask those questions and
Right.
just operate in that way? Like,
That's right.
And
it's
it does
crazy.
take like leaders like you. And I think back to when Donovan and I first started our business together. And one of the things he would say would be like, if there's a bunch of people walking that way, I'm going the other way. And it was
Yeah.
more
There
just
you go.
that, like that,
Yeah.
I hate to say the term again, but like the collective suffering, like people find
Hmm.
so much community in hardship, as
Sure.
opposed to trailblazing, right? It's a much
Yeah.
smaller community.
It is. I'll tell you what, and that's a really good point that you bring up. And I think the antidote for me to collective suffering is collective joy. So rather than getting together with people where they're complaining about their whatever, right? I really kind of leave those conversations very quickly, right?
Yeah.
Because there's nothing there for me, and I'm not suffering, and I don't. I mean, I'm there. I can be empathetic. I can help them if that's what they're asking for, but I'm not there just to
Yeah.
bitch and moan, so to speak. So, but I think the idea of increasing joy, right? That's really another North Star for me.
Hmm.
And I think if people understand that what the time, tension, and resources they invest into living young for a lifetime, what's the net effect of that? Yes, 300-year-old body, 30-year-old, 300-year-old mind, 30-year-old body. But what's the net effect of that? Well, it's actually joy.
Yes.
It's actually joy. And it's like, oh my gosh, it opens up all this world of possibilities. So that's kind of how it falls together for me.
Would you say that maybe that's the ethos, the guiding character that drives you? Is that like search for joy or is it something else?
Well, I would say the ethos is to live young for a lifetime. That's
Mhm.
probably the best phrase.
Mhm.
And inside of that are all the different elements that we talked about.
Right.
And joy is a piece of that. In the life energy circle that I describe in the book, one of them is the first one on the list is mindset. Are you married to your questions or your current answers? Right?
Yeah.
You have to decide.
One of the things I find interesting about really mission driven business owners is sometimes they aren't able to harness like the economics, the business side of it as much as this is my mission, this is my passion and purpose. But it
Yeah.
seems like you have. What do you think that you would attribute that to? And if there are entrepreneurs listening who are up to something bigger like you, but haven't really figured out how to monetize it and make it scalable for as a business, what do
Yeah.
you think that's been for you?
I think it's knowing your limitations, right? It's back to Clint Eastwood. A man's got to know his limitations, right? So it's the idea of knowing what you're really good at, going after those pieces, and bringing in other people around you that can help support you in the areas that you need.
Yeah.
I think that's the only way to actually get it done. Like when I built a heart group, I brought in people that could help me grow that. When I built a heart hospital, co-founded that with another cardiologist, and the people at Baylor, we brought in a lot of good people around us to execute on the vision that we had. I'm really a visionary is what, if you look at all my psychological profile, I'm really a visionary, right? So in order for me to succeed, I need to bring in people around me that can be the integrators and be the operators and do the marketing. I can generate marketing content, but I'm not going to post. I'm not going to do any of that.
Yeah.
I need people that can do those kinds of things, right? So I think it's back to the old adage of stay in your sweet spot and bring people in around you that can support you, and don't underestimate that, right? Don't overestimate what you can do by yourself. I guess that would be kind of my advice.
I love it.
What's next for your business?
Well, we're massively expanding in multiple directions simultaneously. So from a technological standpoint, we keep adding more and more technologies to literally turn back the clock for people, more regenerative technologies. Mm-hmm. We're doing technologies to rebuild people's brains. Obviously, we do simple things like hormone optimization, all that sort of thing, but we can rebuild people's guts. It's not just about stem cells anymore. It's really about how you actually prepare the person before the stem cells go in. So what we've learned in aging is that as we go through the aging process, we accumulate a lot of aging proteins in the blood. And if you drop stem cells into that environment, they don't do so well. So you clear those out with something called plasmapheresis, where you actually pull out plasma, which is the liquid portion of the blood. You leave the cells behind, and you take out those old proteins and put back in either young plasma from a young person, 25 or younger, or you put back in saline and albumin. And with just the washing out of the old, you can actually start to rejuvenate the system. Then if you put in the younger factors, right, that's a big add. Then if you put in other factors that support a regenerative process, like from umbilical cord and placental tissue that doesn't have cells, but has all the signaling and all the messaging elements that can rejuvenate. Now you start to put in stem cells, and then you support the stem cells with peptides that will augment the cascade of healing and rejuvenation. When you start to sequence that in the right way and get all that flowing, it's remarkable what you can accomplish, right? So people think, well, I've got a bad knee, it'll always be a bad knee. Well, not necessarily. I've got a bad shoulder. Not necessarily. Well, I had 6 concussions. My brain's never going to be the same. No, that's not true anymore. Everything can be approached. So it's really super exciting.
Wow.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, we will definitely continue to follow. I find the field fascinating. I love just the path that you went on from, kind of just treating the sick, what we call sometimes sick care, to, preventative, longevity, kind of wellness. Super exciting.
Thank you so much for joining us. Is there a specific place that if our listeners want to get in touch with you, one platform over another?
Sure. Yeah, just for the listeners, if you'd like to work with us, you can reach out to us at gladdenlongevity.com. We work with people on a couple different ways. A lot of people work with us for a year at a time for transformation. Other people will come in and say, hey, my brain needs help. My diabetes needs help. I need my gut fixed or whatever, my hormones are off. So we can work with people for shorter periods of time to fix their problem, so to speak. But we do it from this regenerative perspective, right? It's not just, let's give you a couple things. No, we're looking at it from the ground up. How do we actually help you really get a durable result, if you will? So people can work with us a couple different ways. And then the podcast is great information. If people want to look at the Gladden Longevity podcast, the book is really quite excellent. I think I hear all the time how well written it is. I try to make the complex accessible. So those are different ways that they can get a hold of us. And we have a supplement shop too. If you'd like to pick up some things that we've curated that we think are incredibly helpful for people, there's a lot of things in there too. So
awesome. Well, thank you so much.